Chains of Mephistopheles is a simple and easy to understand card. It's also one of my favorite cards in the whole game. So in today's video, I'm going to justify why you shouldn't think I'm insane despite my love of this card. In case you haven't heard of this card, we'll talk about what it does. Chains of Mephistopheles is an enchantment that costs 1 and a black mana. Every time a player draws a card, that player must first discard a card from his or her hand. If there are no cards in player's hand, take top card from library and place it in the graveyard instead of drawing. This enchantment does not apply to the first card drawn by a player during the draw phase. See? That's a pretty simple effect, is it not? A lot of people used to make fun of how complicated this card is, but it's pretty simple. Still, I guess it might confuse you, so I'll read the errata as well. If a player would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, that player discards a card instead. If the player discards a card this way, they draw a card. If the player doesn't discard a card this way, they mill a card. See? Simple stuff. Every time you draw a card other than the first card you draw during your draw phase, you must first discard a card. If you can't do that, you instead put a card into your graveyard. What's so complicated about that? This card is really fucking cool, in my opinion. First off, this effect is really brutal, but I find it interesting because it's really only brutal if you guys aren't playing fair Magic. If neither player has any cards that say draw a card, then this card does absolutely nothing. So feel free to swing in with that Grey Ogre knowing that you're safe. Unless they have a Ancestral Recall. That might be a bad time. Also, do not cast your Brainstorm while they have a Chains of Mephistopheles on the field, or you are in for a bad time. Now, I did say that this card is considered complicated, and despite downplaying that earlier, there is some validity to these claims. So let's talk briefly about replacement effects. A replacement effect is simply an effect that replaces another effect. He said, trying not to sound stupid. The simplest way to keep track of replacement effects is to look for the word instead. Not every replacement effect uses instead, but most of them do. Another interesting thing is there are actually 2, or I guess arguably 3, replacement effects on this card, but it only uses instead once. And since we're talking about Chains of Mephistopheles, we'll just use that in our examples here. So the first replacement effect on this card changes draw a card to discard a card, then draw a card. This notably does not apply to the card you naturally draw during your draw step, but any other card drawn is replaced with discard, then draw. In the comprehensive rules of the game, 614.1a explains that the word instead indicates a replacement effect. If a card cannot be discarded before a card is drawn, then instead of replacing draw a card with discard a card, then draw a card, it replaces draw a card with put a card from the top of your library into your graveyard, or as we'd say today, mill a card. Are you following? This is starting to sound a bit complicated, and we haven't even gotten to the complicated bit yet. Replacement effects replace the effects. What I'm trying to say is that the original effect no longer happens. In the case of Chains of Mephistopheles, that means that instead of drawing, you discard and then draw. What's especially interesting about Chains is that it replaces the draw ability with a draw ability. Discard, then draw, still tells you to draw, right? So what happens if there are 2 Chains of Mephistopheles in play? Some really cool shit. So if there are 2 Chains of Mephistopheles in play when you draw a card other than the first card you would draw during your draw step, then the first chains will replace the draw with discard, then draw. And the second chains will see the draw in the discard, then draw replacement effect and replace that with discard, then draw, which will make the effect discard a card, then draw a card. That means you'll have to discard 2 cards for each card you draw. If that isn't complicated enough for you, don't worry, because there's a secondary replacement effect on this card, as we've discussed, and that replacement effect doesn't have anything to do with drawing cards, it just mills a card, which is not drawing a card. So, same example. You attempt to draw a card that isn't the first card you would draw on your draw step, and there are 2 Chains of Mephistopheles on the field, and you have no cards in hand. What happens now? Well, you mill 1 card because the first chains will attempt to draw a card into discard a card, then draw a card, but since you can't discard a card, it'll replace the effect with mill a card. Since the draw has already been replaced by mill a card, the second Chains of Mephistopheles will see that the effect doesn't draw a card, and it will do nothing. Simple stuff, right? This is such a cool card. Don't cast Brainstorm into this card though. Even with 1 Chains of Mephistopheles, that'll still be pretty brutal, because the chain replaces each draw individually, so if a card says draw 3 cards, then each of those draws will be replaced with discard a card, then draw. So you will end up discarding and then replacing that card 3 times, then you'll have to put 2 cards back. This will basically put you at like -3 in card advantage, unless you're like playing Dredge or something, then it might be okay to do this. Okay, so real talk for a moment. This card can be really fucking miserable to play with or against, and it's definitely no fun at all if you don't understand some very specific nuances within the rules. Luckily, you're unlikely to see this card since it's a rare from Legends and on the reserve list. It is not many copies of this card running around. The rulings for this card are also pretty funny. I've spelled most of them out already, but one of the rulings for this card literally starts with, here's what happens when Chains of Mephistopheles replaces a player's draw. And I find that so funny. The ruling literally has to re-explain how the card functions. There's also a couple of versions of the flowchart alter, which is pretty funny. Those are kind of worth a laugh. The rulings for this card haven't really changed much over the years, at least not from the early days. Part of that is because this card doesn't really see much play anywhere that isn't like a boomer whale format. No offense. But there is one small change in the rulings that I find pretty interesting. In the December 19th, 1994 ruling summary for Legends, it says that each player is exempt from 1 draw each turn, so your opponent can use like a JM Day Tome or other effect to draw during your turn without being affected. I'm not entirely sure what the authority is on this ruling, and I don't have any idea if this ruling was ever used in official tournaments of any kind, or if this is just something that was said by someone with some sway in the grassroots tournament scene that was available at the time. But this ruling seems incorrect even at the time. The card specifically mentions draw step even in the original card, so I don't think it's reasonable to assume you can draw 1 free card per each turn. But I did think that old ruling was kind of interesting. What do you guys think of this card? Do you think I'm insane for loving this card for the sheer chaos that it causes? I would tend to agree with you. I also don't really have much in terms of like data for how this card was used and how it was perceived. I think part of the draw of this card for me is that I learned about it much later than I did with most of these really old cards. Like, the first thing anyone says to you when you start playing Magic is, hey, Black Lotus, Lightning Bolt, and Counterspell exist. But stumbling on Chains of Mephistopheles was far more natural and kind of mind-blowing for me. It's so compelling, and it's strong, brutal, and just overall such an interesting card to think about. The art also goes a long way for making this card desirable for me, so let's talk about the art. Chains of Mephistopheles was illustrated by Heather Hudson, and this piece is a fucking banger. Look at this thing. This dude is fucking terrifying. It's hairy, its horns are growing wherever the fuck they want, and also it's a bat. I love this art. It screams classic Magic card to me and is just so unique in such a cool way. Heather seems like she made a specific choice to avoid as much symmetry as she could, and this piece is all the more unique and rich for it. This is so fucking cool in my opinion. Now, this is the only art you'll see for this card in paper, unless someone has a printer, I guess. But this card did see 2 Magic Online printings. The first one uses the classic art, but there is a Magic Online promo featuring new art from Darkin? I don't know. Darkin, maybe. This art is pretty good, but I much prefer the original. I think this art does a good job being its own thing while drawing homage to the classic, but it misses out on some of the key things I love about the original. It's very good, it's just not my preference. Yeah, Chains of Mephistopheles. I really like this card, but I'm also incredibly interested to hear what you all think about this card. I completely understand if you hate this card, especially if you had to play against it a lot, but it's such a fun card to think about. I think I categorize this card in the same way that I do Scheherazade. It's so magical and interesting, but the logistics of it make it not the most well-designed game piece. I still think it's cool, but it's definitely not a card I'd suggest putting into Standard. It would be cool to see this on Arena, though. Well, that's all I have for you today. As always, you can like the video if you liked it, you can subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thanks for watching.